Welcome, everybody. I can see everyone's slowly starting to join. We're just going to wait for everyone to connect. To connect to audio, you'll see it says that it's going to be live streamed, it's going to be recorded, and my colleague Safua will be opening up the meeting. So over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lily. So very good morning and a very warm welcome to all our esteemed speakers and participants in what I have deliberately chosen to call a special dialogue convened by SALO. I think Lily has already explained, I think the technical side, the meeting's been recorded. I'm doing the opening remarks. There'll be speakers, a question and answer session. You can use the chat group as well to pose questions. But to go back to my opening remarks, as I said, I chose the word special very deliberately. And I chose it for two key reasons, okay? So the first reason is, unlike previous SALO dialogues, today's dialogue, to my knowledge, is the first time that a diverse range of stakeholders from across the spectrum of the G20 platform, operating within the various quite bureaucratic structures of the G20. It's the first time they've been brought together on one platform, and to look at what the different particular focus group platforms are looking at, okay? So it provides a very unique opportunity, being the first of such a dialogue that brings together the various platforms, is to share ideas and to share experiences, to look at what we've done and what we still need to do and what we need to do collaboratively in a spirit of openness, and to understand that collaboration and dialogue at the level at which SALO is facilitating it does not in any way take away the independence and the independent contributions of any of the organizations or individuals present in this dialogue itself. And I think that's quite important for me, and why I would call it a special dialogue. Secondly, we reached we having this dialogue at what I would call a historical milestone reached by the G20, when 26 years after its formation, an African country has assumed the role of presidency. Now, that's quite a historical milestone when you look at this advancement 26 years since it was formed. And it happens to be South Africa. It happens to be the president of South Africa. But this is just 4 years short of our democracy, where our president and an African president, unofficially as of April 2025, he's serving as the chair of the G20, but the role that he's occupying officially started on the 1st of December 2024. Now, the specialness and this historical milestone of the G20 must be seen in the context of its history, which I'm going to go through very briefly, okay? We all may or may not know that the G20 was formed in 1999. It was initially as a meeting of finance ministers and central bank governors, okay? In 2008, it renewed, reformed itself into a leaders summit, and was declared in 2008 as the premier forum for international economic cooperation in 2009, just a year later. Over time, its agenda has grown from economic um, issues to include the issues of climate change development, which I think we all know is a very broad term, and development covers both social and economic development across the spectrum, okay, including health. So South Africa is one of 19 countries that make up the GU. So you've got 19 member countries, and then you have the EU, and the EU represents those countries who within the EU space who are not direct members. Okay. Together, these 19 countries, including the EU membership that makes up the G20, accounts for 85% of global GDP. It accounts for 75% of trade, and it accommodates 2/3 of the world's population. Okay. So for me, when you look at these two reasons make this a very special SALO dialogue. The one, as I stated, is the multi-sectoral gathering today, okay, and a discussion around how we use the African G20 presidency to unite various sectors of our organization, whether we do it under our focus areas, labor, trade, civil society, etc., but also for cross-pollination and cross-alignment between those sectors. And this is what this dialogue offers, right? It provides us with a powerful, powerful opportunity to amplify African voices in shaping the G20 priorities. And that goes to the second reason. And our main task when we amplify these voices is to embed the theme of solidarity, equality, and sustainability. And I think particularly with the inclusion of development as one of the additional themes of the G20, we really need to look at that. I personally feel that sometimes our separation between social development and economic development, and I'd love to hear from the Labour people around this, is that it's a dichotomy we make that dilutes our approach to economic development, and that we need to be talking about socio-economic development and not social as one part and economic as the other. Okay. So we need to embed the theme solidarity, equality, and sustainability across all the G20 working groups, across all the engagement platforms, be they the C20, the Y20, the L20, the T20. And I think with all these engagement platforms, what we need to try and strive for, as I said, is to find synergy and alignment, where while we are having recommendations specific to our sector focus, we are also able to unite around a set of common goals and recommendations, okay? As the only country, and I will be concluding soon, as the only African country in the G20 at the moment, South Africa's leadership offers an opportunity for us to reimagine and expand African participation, the rest of the continent in these global processes. And this is particularly important when we talk about, and I think everyone has seen every single thing that can be seen on US, its sanctions, the removal of aid, etc., that the resource-based African continent and its knowledge systems, both indigenous and academic, is enough for us to become a continent of economic impact globally, So we need to get more African participation in these processes. So what I'm looking forward to in terms of this dialogue is that we see this dialogue as a first step in that direction. I'm looking forward to listening to the contributions each of you will make. And yeah, I'm very honored to have opened this, been given the opportunity to open this special dialogue. I'm now going to hand over to Manjotsi. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you for participating and joining us. And over to you, Manjotsi.
Thank you, Safora, for setting the tone and giving us some context in terms of where this is coming from. And let me also take this opportunity to welcome everyone. I see a lot of familiar faces. I also see a lot of new faces. I see people that have been working on the G20 issues for quite some time in the room. I see a very strong core of South Africans that were in Brazil in December. And so it's good to see a mix of different backgrounds coming together to discuss, check on progress of where we are. We know that South Africa took the presidency of the G20 on the 1st of December last year. And so we are 4 or 5 months into South Africa's presidency. A lot has happened in the official G20 platforms, but also in the other tracks, the T20, the C20, the Labour 20, the Women 20, and many other groups there. I'm also aware that there are many others that are outside trackers who are not in any of the official tracks, but are also doing a lot of work to try to bring as many voices as possible on the agenda, taking advantage of South Africa's presidents of the G20. We know that South Africa has insisted that this G20 presidents is not a South African G20, but essentially an African G20. Amplification of the South to South cooperation is important. Putting the African agenda on the table is important, but also safeguarding South Africa's national interest is a pillar, one of the pillars that sort of guides South Africa's presidents on this, and multilateralism in a world where we are facing a lot of challenges. And so as SALO, as I think Safora has clearly articulated, we hope that in a small way, we can try to encourage how to bring African voices on these platforms, how as many global South voices can be a part of this massive process, not as an end in itself, because the G20 is one of the platforms that we can utilize, but we need to use other forums like the G20 to really set the tone and the agenda of the kind of a new world order that we have to begin to appreciate and anticipate. So I don't want to, as you have seen on the program, I think Lily has posted the program on the chat. We have a very long list of experts who are going to speak on this issue. What we are trying to do is to just get updates on where we are in the process, where each one of us we are in terms of what challenges are we facing, what progress have we made, those that are not participating but are eager to participate, what can they do? How can they become part of the processes? I see a lot of comrades from across the continent in the room as well. How do they find platforms to begin to participate in these platforms? So you would say, in a way, we are just trying to say, how do we foster African voices, global South voices, to the platforms that you guys are already doing a lot of work on. I see a lot of comrades from the climate group, and I know that they're doing a lot of work. So let me go straight into our first speaker. And of course, it's proper to start with the official voices of the G20 itself. And so today we are joined by Mr. Masocha Mnguni, who is the G20 project coordinator officially for South Africa, but also is the director of economic development at DECO, quite a person who is experienced on these kinds of things. We saw the work he was doing even in Brazil and before that. So it would be good to start there, Mr. Mnguni. And yeah, it's 4 or 5 months into the process. What has been happening? Where are we? What challenges are emerging? Where is the main focus in terms of the agenda? Are we on track to sort of meet what South Africa has put as its deliverables for the 2025 G20 presidents? Yeah, you have about 10 minutes to take us through that.
Okay. Thank you, Munjotsi, program facilitator, for giving me the floor. As has been indicated, my name is Masocha Mnguni, Director Economic Development at DERCO, but in the context of the G20, I'm the overall project coordinator on the Shepherd track, mainly coordinating substance-related issues. I think the introductions we got from both Safura and Munjotsi laid as it were the red carpet for our discussions today in terms of the progress being made in the South Africa's presidency of the G20. I did share my presentation with the Secretariat, so I would kindly request Lily to screen share the presentation. Okay. Yeah, if you can then open it up for a slideshow. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. So, colleagues, as has been indicated by the speakers before me in the introduction, we as South Africa assumed the presidency of the G20 on the 1st of December last year, when President Ramaphosa took the presidency from President Lula in Rio de Janeiro in November last year. And of course, we would lead the G20 until the end of November this year. And this is quite significant if you consider the fact that South Africa will be the hope of the continent, the global south, to basically consolidate the progress in terms of advancing the developmental agenda, which was put on the table under the 3 last presidencies from the global south in the G20. That is Indonesia in 2022, India 2023, and Brazil last year. This is, of course, why we have as our theme solidarity, equality, and sustainability, basically as a response to the widening inequality we are seeing, the widening poverty, unemployment, and so on and so forth. And of course, this is also exacerbated by the volatile geopolitical environment under which we operate. And as you know, of course, this geopolitical situation has become even more acute under South Africa's G20 presidency. So it is in that context that South Africa sees itself as the penholder for the continent and the global south to ensure that in its basket of priorities, it advances this developmental agenda I have spoken of. And of course, another important issue worth noting was that under South Africa's urging or influence, the African Union became a full member of the G20 in 2023 during India's G20 presidency. And to that effect, since the AU joined the G20, South Africa enjoys a very close working relationship with our colleagues in Addis Ababa. We have regular coordination meetings. Our priorities are aligned to those of the African Union. In particular, the issue of making sure that we entrench our strategic framework for African development, that is Agenda 2063 and its implementation plan in our priorities. And of course, also aligned to the African agenda are issues related to the reform of the international financial architecture, international food security and agriculture, the just energy transition, trade and investment, health and vaccine manufacturing, amongst others. And you will see, of course, later on in my presentation that these issues which the African Union has put as priorities are also part of South Africa's high-level priorities. And of course, it goes without saying, if we were to move from the premise that foreign policy is influenced by domestic consideration, our presidency also departs from the three strategic priorities of the South African government, namely to reduce poverty and tackle the high cost of living, two, building a capable, ethical, developmental state, and three, driving inclusive growth and job creation. Next slide, please. So I will skip this slide because Safura has already addressed it in terms of the importance of the G20 comprising of 85% of the world's GDP and so on and so forth. Safe to say that the G20 for South Africa is an important platform to mobilize predictable, sustainable and low-cost financing for sustainable development. As we know, African countries in the main spend exorbitant amount servicing debt, thus foregoing developmental and infrastructure programs, including health and education. This is why, of course, one of our high-level priorities is the issue of debt sustainability and, of course, addressing the high cost of capital, which is why we have instituted under South Africa's G20 presidency the review of the cost of capital, which will be chaired by our former finance minister, Mr. Trevor Manuel. Next slide. Yeah, so as Munjozi indicated, the presidency is well underway. We have about 130 meetings in total that will be taking place throughout the year. We are now in the second phase of these meetings. As we speak, there is currently a G20 meeting happening, both in the finance track and also in the Sherpa track. In the finance track, we are having the spring meetings happening in Washington, D.C., where our Minister of Finance is leading our finance track delegation. At the level of the Sherpa track, of course, we have the agriculture working group meeting in KwaZulu-Natal, in eThekwini, where we will be discussing issues related to agriculture. Tomorrow, we will be having the second task force meeting on food security, which I also indicated is linked to the priorities of the African Union. Amongst the other major meetings we have held so far are the foreign ministers meeting, which took place in February in Nasrec, where we discuss as the G20 how we are going to manage the geopolitical issues to prevent a situation where geopolitical divisions affect discussions on technical issues. We have had situations in the past where outcomes couldn't be reached because of geopolitical issues. I can refer, for example, to the conflict in Ukraine when it broke out. The discussions in the G20 became conflated with those developments, which is why one of the most important resolutions we took at the foreign ministers meeting is that the technical working groups will not be discussing geopolitical issues. Geopolitical issues will only be discussed at the Sherpa, foreign ministers, and leaders level so that we can make progress in the technical areas of the G20. And this, of course, will enable us to lobby successfully important policy initiatives for the continent and the global south, including debt sustainability, reform of the international financial architecture, international taxation, especially the taxation of the super rich, the issue of critical minerals for inclusive economic growth, climate financing, Agenda 2030 and Agenda 2063, trade and investment, etc. Next slide. I have, I think, addressed the issue of the importance of the continent, so we can move to the next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in terms of the theme, I did indicate that the theme we have chosen, solidarity, equality, and sustainability, seeks to respond to the challenges that are confronting in the main the developing South and the continent. So through solidarity, we seek to achieve a future that is people-centered, development-orientated, and inclusive. And of course, this draws its inspiration from our African philosophy of Ubuntu, which of course see our fate as interconnected, meaning that the challenges faced by one nation affects all nations. By equality, we seek to ensure fair treatment, opportunities, and advancement for all individuals and nations. And of course, sustainability is about meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. Next slide, please. In terms of the priorities we have chosen, I'm not going to unpack them because of time considerations, but we'll be happy to delve into them during the discussion session. So I will just list them. The president, when he announced the South Africa's G20 presidency last year, highlighted 4 national priorities that will drive our work, namely strengthening disaster resilience and response, Two, ensuring debt sustainability for low-income countries. Next slide. Three, mobilizing finance for a just energy transition. And lastly, harnessing critical minerals for inclusive growth and sustainable development. This issue of critical minerals, of course, is quite an important one, not only for South Africa, but for the African continent, in that we are departing from the traditional approach to the question of minerals, because we are positioning critical minerals as a locomotive for inclusive economic growth and sustainable development, which is why we have anchored this issue on three key elements. That is increased investment in exploration, two, increased beneficiation at source, and then three, responsible mining and sourcing of minerals. And of course, we hope that by the end of our presidency, we would adopt a G20 framework for critical minerals, which will be the first, of course, in the history of the G20. Our work is also aligned to the 2024 report of the UNSG panel on critical energy transition minerals, which was co-chaired amongst others by one of our finest diplomats, Ambassador Nozipho Mxakato Diseko. Next slide. Yeah, so in terms of the approach to the G20, I did mention the tumultuous geopolitical environment in which we find ourselves in. But of course, as president of the G20, South Africa has the responsibility of ensuring that there is cohesion and focus by the G20 on the priorities it has put on the table, which is why we emphasize the need for cooperation, collaboration, and partnership during our G20 presidency. Next slide, please. So to just give a brief overview of the high-level deliverables we have put on the table, in addition to the four priorities I have highlighted, we have established three inclusive economic growth, industrialization, employment, and reduced inequality, two, task force on food security, and then three, task force on artificial intelligence, data governance, and innovation for sustainable development. On the issue of the review, this, of course, is one of the legacy projects of South Africa's G20 presidency, with South Africa being the last G20 member to hold the presidency in the G20's first cycle. Of course, the Rio Declaration we adopted last year tasked us to lead an evaluation of the G20's first full cycle of presidency, looking at what has worked, the G20's impact on policy coordination efforts, a review of the working methods, issues that need reform to enable the G20 to address evolving common challenges effectively. So this work has started and has been widely welcomed by G20 members. We do, of course, expect to present a report to the leaders in November in terms of what recommendations we will be taking forward in the second cycle, beginning with the presidency of the United States next year. I did mention the issue of the cost of capital review, which will be led by former Minister Trevor Manuel. We also will be advancing, of course, for the benefit of the Africa agenda, the elevated compact with Africa, which of course seeks to attract private investment for reform-orientated African countries. Next slide. In terms of inclusivity and outreach, as we do our work, of course, we are not losing sight of the other important processes that are happening at the level of civil society. So as we are doing today, we have been, since we started our G20 presidency, Munjozi did mention that we were also present in Rio, where we participated in civil society meetings and also the first G20 social summit. So we are happy to inform that South Africa, following this excellent initiative of Brazil, will be hosting the second G20 social summit in November later this year. The purpose of the social summit is to ensure a greater inclusivity of the grassroots in terms of the work of the G20. We do know that there are currently 13 engagement groups in the G20. As important as these may be, we are of the view that they do not sufficiently cover the totality of voices in the grassroots, which is why we are then taking up further this initiative of hosting the second G20 social summit to ensure that voices such as those of persons with disabilities, interfaith organizations, traditional leaders, indigenous peoples, and other important stakeholders are accommodated to truly make South Africa's presidency a people's G20, which is why when we are going to meet for the third G20 Sherpa meeting in the Northwest in June this year, we will make provision in the program for submissions by engagement groups on issues they would want to be reflected in the leaders' declaration. And of course, soon we will be launching the roadmap to the G20 Social Summit in Johannesburg later this year. And we do hope that, of course, the participant present today will be contributing to this important process. Next slide. Yeah, just to give then a sense of the important dates, we will have the Sherpa meeting, the last Sherpa meeting in November, 16 to 19. The importance of this meeting is that it will be the meeting which will be negotiating the leaders' declaration. And of course, we do, we are waiting in anticipation for the suggestions that civil society will submit to the presidency on issues they would want the leaders to adopt. I've made references to the social summit taking place 18 to 20 November. The summit itself will be taking place 22 to 23 November. And as has been indicated, Nasrec in Johannesburg will be the venue for the summit. Next slide, I think this is the last one. Yeah, so to conclude, maybe if there's a key takeaway, it's that South Africa, in its as it does its G20 work, we do not seek to replace already existing processes in the multilateral fora, but rather to reinforce the work that is already being done. I did indicate the strength and influence of the G20. So when the G20 adopts a strong language, be it on international cooperation, be it on political issues such as making the multilateral system more equitable, representative, and fit for purpose, this language does in a big way of course, influence discussions already taking place in the multilateral bodies such as the United Nations. So I will stop there, Mr. Facilitator, and apologies maybe for taking a bit long in my intervention. And I do look forward, of course, to receiving comments and questions from the participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mnguni, for that. I think that it was important. I allowed you to continue because I thought it was important to be reminded of what South Africa see as the agenda, the deliverables, the priorities, and how to foster the African agenda into the deliverables itself, but also promote South-to-South cooperation and ensure that the global South is fully represented, knowing that South Africa is the last of the presidents from the global South in a chain of the past 3 years or so. So it was important to be reminded of the themes, the priorities, the pillars that underpin South Africa's agenda. I thought it would set a good tone for, but we are out of time. So what I will try to do is really to speak less and allow the speakers to come in briefly so that we have time for, I see a lot of other key participants whose voices would want to hear at the end. So I want to quickly move to the engagement groups and just hear a sense of progress. What are the challenges, but how can others who have not been part of what you have been doing join on that table to try and ensure that at the end, we are able to influence a progressive communique that represents not just African voices, but the global South's voices in a very, very strong way. And I know that others will continue to work on the tracks to ensure that their recommendations are solid. Let me move to the T20 representative. I think that we had Dr. Mtembo was supposed to be in. Unfortunately, he's somewhere, but he has sent an equally eloquent and informed Mr. Ashraf Patel, who is a research associate with the IGD. Mr. Patel, I'll cut your time to 7, my brother. If you can be brief and just take us through what's been happening in the T20.
Yes, thank you, colleagues. Am I audible?
Quite audible, very audible, actually.
Thank you very much. As the colleagues have mentioned, the G20 is the premier global elite institution. So in international relations scholarship, it's kind of a very apex elite formation where the previous G7 generally incorporated the global South in 2009 to rescue their economies in what they call the global financial crisis. So fundamentally, the G20 is about finance and debt. And as Africa faces the current debt crisis, it would be interesting to see if that core or key performance indicator can be resolved. But nonetheless, the T20 stands for technical 20 essentially being the think tanks. And broadly speaking, our role is kind of to develop the thinking and the policy briefs for the G20, but mainly for our ministries or for the various ministers. So the G20 nations all have representatives at the G level, the government level. And so the T20 plays a kind of intersection role that comprises of kind of partly the academic community and partly the think tank communities in these 20 nations. And the objectives, of course, being to align research briefs, policy briefs around the 5 themes of the G20 in any particular year. Its genesis goes back to 2017 when Germany hosted the G20. At the time, the German Development Agency, IDOS, developed a kind of forum. to kickstart T20. And since then, kind of the tradition took over, and the T20 has kind of moved on. So far this year, we have commenced work with our Inception Conference. The Inception Conference took place in early March this year. And we already have the website, t20southafrica.org. And this T20 network comprises of 5 task forces. The first one being trade and investment, building on the Brazilian presidency. It's going to kind of focus on trade instruments, global industrial value chains, industrialization, etc. The second task force is broadly called digital transformation. And this task force is looking at how AI and technology can meet the goals of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, particularly looking at issues around connectivity, information integrity, and regulating AI. The third task force is finance for development. This is a big one, of course. Obviously, these discussions kind of segue into the broad UN processes. And this year, we have, after 10 years, the UN Finance for Development Summit. And that's a huge development. And these would naturally kind of filter into the UN processes. And of course, solidarity. Task Force 4 is solidarity for the achievement of the SDGs. I think here we can play a major role as South Africa and the African continent. What kind of solidarity do we require? Noting that Africa faces a food security crisis as well as a debt crisis. I mean, these twin challenges are massive at this point in time. And with the cuts in kind of development aid, US aid, and even the EU as a bloc is cutting their development aid by 50%. So I think the term solidarity is a misnomer. The North are not committed to solidarity as we look at these themes. And then finally, accelerating climate action and the just energy transition. Again, this task force is looking at issues of climate action, the just energy transition, and many challenges here. As we all know, the US has finally pulled out of the just energy transition, and that leaves very little resources for the just energy transition. So these are big debates. How are they going to segue into the COP30, the climate change conference taking place in Brazil later this year? So all of these kind of intersect in very interesting ways. And I think amongst the T20, all our policy briefs address these relevant themes. We've had 800 policy briefs that were submitted over 3 months. We have done selections of the final policy briefs. And now, as we speak, in the next 6 weeks, the authors that have been accepted are busy completing their policy briefs. And that is going to be concluded at the end of May. In June, we have the T20 midterm conference in South Africa, 2-day conference. And then those policy briefs would then feed into the G processes. Of course, we have a dynamic relationship with Business 20, Labor 20, Women 20, Civil 20, Social 20. All of these kind of intersect at different levels. And finally, the T20 summit takes place in October, November this year, just before the government summit, the leadership summit. And these kind of policy documents or briefs feed into all the ministries. So it's a very dynamic process, and there is space for some of the more critical thinking as we engage with civil society and labor and other formations. I'll leave it at that for now, and we can take the other discussions later. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pato. I think that was quite important, and I know that colleagues are taking note of the dates and also how to engage with you. I want to quickly move to two people, because I'll bring you together and hopefully you can try to do a presentation together in about 10 minutes or so. So let me have Riska Koopman. She's with Aphrodite, but I know that she has been working with the C20, and I just want to highlight, we have received an email from EJN and Aphrodite indicating that there have been issues with the C20. We know that the C20 has not officially done an inception meeting. And so I just wanted to highlight that she is not, she will take us through what the C20, where the C20 is, what it is, where the issues are, but knowing that there are issues that they are trying to resolve behind the scenes in terms of the leadership of the C20. So Riska, please take us through. I bring you in, and I'll also bring in Sarah, because I think that lessons from Brazil would be perfect to be heard immediately after your presentation, both of you representing the C20 engagement group. And yeah, and so take us through the issues and the issues that you are dealing with behind the scenes. Please, let's hopefully let's leave them out. Is that okay?
Good morning, colleagues. Thank you so much, Josie, for the introduction. I'm Riska Koopman. I'm working at Aphrodite as a policy officer and also serving as in the C20 team for South Africa at the moment. Could Lily please pull up my presentation? I'm going to give a brief presentation on what the C20 is and the process. Also, noting that there are issues that we are facing internally. So this presentation will be one of transparency, contextualizing the process as we know it to be. So as I said, the presentation will just be an overview of what the C20 is and its role within the G20. Next slide, please, Lily. So the C20 is the official engagement track of the G20. It was established in 2013 under the Russian presidency, and it serves as the official dialogue space between the G20 governments and international civil society. As part of the G20 process, it plays multiple roles, providing expertise and holding government accountable to their commitments, seeking positive outcomes for society as a whole, and pushing for effective financial means and allocation of resources to achieve those outcomes. I think people who have gone before me, especially Ashraf, spoke about it being a financial forum where issues of debt and financing are mostly discussed and set. So the C20 is a major contributor to the G20 process. Besides acting as a guardian and a watchdog, civil society is also the home traditionally of innovators and experts on technology, sustainable development, gender equality, climate emergency, health. And so all these themes come to the fore, and we want to put forward cutting edge solutions which meet the demands of the day. Next slide, please. And so the C20 has been in existence since 2013, and since then, a structure has been developed over time by people who have been involved in the C20. And so this slide is just showing what this looks like. It comprises of the C20 Troika, which is then three main components, which is the past presidency, the current, which is South Africa, and then the next. So it would be Brazil, South Africa, and then the US. And then it has a C20, sorry for the typo there, C20 chair and co-chairs, the C20 Sherpa and Shoe Sherpa. So this can really be made up by the current presidency, C20 presidency, to see how they want to structure that. And then we have the C20 Secretariat, the International Advisory Committee, and then also the C20 Steering Committee. So these are like the supporting structures of the C20 to make sure that things go according to the process which has been formulated over time. And then also there are some principles that the C20 abides by or operates under. Next slide, please. And so these are the C20 principles. And as I said, these have been developed since 2013. And so they kind of speak to the underpinnings of the process, and they provide really predictability and stability to the process. The first one is global character, to note that the C20 is a global international process. Yes, it is hosted by the host presidency, but it's an international process. It goes before us. It is something that we bring civil society organizations from all over the world into the fold. And I think this has historically been the importance of the C20, especially because before the AU was a part of it, South Africa was the only African country involved, right? So to bring in countries outside of that table, the C20 wants to do that by being global in its character. It then also operates under the principle of transparency. That is, that decision should be circulated and should be done in an open way. And then also all C20 outputs, which we'll get to, are also developed in the same manner of transparency and independence, and no one person or one group can own it. It's the structure that, as in the previous slide, everybody has participated in. And once a decision is made, for example, on its statement, not one person or single body can then edit the document afterwards, for example. So it has that unison and participatory and inclusivity element to it. And then also that these principles or the process of the C20 can't be changed within the C20 here. It's only at the end when that presidency says, actually, you know what, we want to add a principle, we want to edit a principle, this is our experience. So it also has that element of reflexivity, and then also to kind of better accommodate for the demands of the time. And then independence, this is just to safeguard the process from civil society actors. So for example, because we play a watchdog role to government, we can't have government involved in our process or dictating our process. We retain our autonomy. Collaboration, this is collaboration with the other engagement groups, but it's also collaboration with other processes. And for example, with this year with the BRICS, where we see synergies, we can also pursue that. And then human rights, gender inequality, and women's empowerment, these are really cross-cutting and at the core of how we operate as a C20. These are principles that we want to always keep at the center of our work and also advance. So we keep a close watch on how we frame things, and also to make sure that we do not transgress any of these. Inclusivity, this I've mentioned before, especially this year, it's so important because next year we are going to the USA, and we're seeing this onslaught onto democracy and the rise of the right. So inclusivity is also then ensuring that the process is as inclusive as possible. Also for this year, bringing in as many African civil societies, because they have traditionally been left outside of the table just because of the way the G20 is set up. So it's really an important year for us. We also want to use the AU's seat at the table to kind of position key demands, and especially on debt, because Africa is facing the worst debt crisis in a very long time. And then continuity, this is, I think Sarah will speak to it. It is how the working group themes are taken on. And so it's not going to be like a haphazard process. It's something that continues year on year. And that is also how we track and measure our impact, and also to speak to issues which are long-standing, for example, debt, gender inequality, racial inequalities, things like that. And then predictability is for the process to be predictable, to have these steps in the process, and for there to be clear schedules and processes which allows for step-by-step process to deliver the deliverables, which I'll be discussing next. And this also provides an element of stability to the process. Next slide, please, Lily. These are the working groups which we have landed on for this year, and you'll see many of them are a continuation of Brazil. The first one is gender equity and feminist just economies. The second one is food security. Then we have anti-racism, environmental, climate and energy justice, peace, security and gun control, followed by sustainable and resilient cities and communities. 6 is integrated health for all. 7, global financial architecture reform and debt. 8, education for all. 9, technology and digitalization. And then the 10th one is delivering and protecting democracy and fighting corruption. We've also added the philanthropy, which I omitted here. My apologies. So these are the working groups that we've landed on. And at this stage, due to where we are, we have now closed the registration for working group facilitators, but we have internally also sifted through all of over 800 applications and landed on 3 or 4 organizations to lead each of these working groups. However, we haven't been able to communicate that yet or take next steps as we are undergoing an internal process regarding the leadership. So at the moment, we have the working groups, we have the leads, but these have not been communicated yet in respect for the process being undertaken by the C20 leadership in South Africa. Next slide, please. And I think Lily also asked me to identify our key priorities. And so by way of working, the C20 leadership doesn't define the key priorities. That is the work of the working group. And so they will, in each of the working group themes, they will come up with their key priorities, and then that will formulate this, populate this slide in future, because that then means that there is a sense of participation and ownership by people in different countries, in different sectors, who are interested in that specific working group or theme. So that would formulate, that's a process to how we get to our key priorities. And so we are not at that step yet, unfortunately. Next step, please. Next slide. Sorry. And so these are some of the C20 content deliverables. And I think each one of them are important. The first one, I'll start just with working group papers. These are position papers, policy briefs, any content coming out of the working groups, and whatever they decide on. For example, working group on digitalization could be presenting a paper, putting out a policy brief on AI policy in schools, for example. That is something that they decide on, right? And that is also going back to the principles of the C20, is these elements of autonomy. C20 statements is that the C20 leadership or the secretariat can issue statements on issues of the day. For example, we can issue a statement on debt. We can issue statements on the cost of capital, also on critical minerals, issues of the day again. Joint statements, these are statements that we can author with other working groups. On the T20, for example, we can put together a statement on debt cancellation. These are just examples. And then the C20 communique, that is our formal communique that we come up with, coming out of the C20 policy pack. And the policy pack is a really critical part of the process. And this is where all of the working groups put together a 1 to 2 to 3 pager on the key demands, and also then outlining the context of each working group. And then that gets put together in a policy pack. And this, you can see on our C20 website, is an historic key document coming out of the process. And so each country has put together a policy pack. And then the final declaration is one that we write up as a leadership, that we put forward to government at the summit at the end of the year. So these are our content deliverables. Next slide, please. And so these are, the operational challenges. So what can happen in the C20 is that we can take an insider or formal role for advocacy and campaigning, and this would be the track that we are pursuing, where we are the official mouthpiece to government and in dialogue with government. Or we can take an outsider informal role, and this work has also then been kickstarted by our colleagues at the Fight Inequality Alliance and others. So this is work done outside of the formal negotiations and dialogues. So these are things like webinars. They also put out position papers. They can have protests outside the official meetings, whatever they decide. So there are different tactics and strategies and campaigning methods to the inside and outside role. And I've highlighted in the middle the question, where the C20 is right now, as we are waiting an outcome from Durko to see where to next. But as I said, we won't be discussing that today, but just to note that there are many different ways of interacting with the C20 and with the G20. It's not one path for everybody. Next slide, please. As I said, this is where we are now. We are waiting government official communication. And then the registration form for the facilitating working groups has closed. We've selected the working group co-facilitators. And so what should now be happening is the first meeting of the working group co-facilitators, the announcement of the secretariat and the steering committee, the inception meeting, and then also the first meeting of the working groups, which will then start feeding into those key content deliverables. If you have any questions for me, please put them in the chat box, or maybe we'll have some time. But Sarah will also then be able to give some more context on Brazil and the handover and things like that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Riska. I think that was quite useful, and I think there will be a lot of questions. But I want to move to Sarah, and Sarah, I want to try and, because I know you forgive me, I want to cut your time to 4 minutes, please. So let's try to 4-5 minutes. We'll come back to you during questions. So let's try and get the brief. What lessons can we draw from Brazil? Especially where we are now, 4-5 months into the process of the G20. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mujo, for the invitation. I'll do my best to try to stick with 5 minutes. Lily, can you please share my presentation? I sent you on WhatsApp.
So maybe I didn't, as Lily is sharing, just to say that Sarah has been one of the key leaders of the C20 in Brazil last year during Brazil's presidency. We thought that it would be good to get some inputs from Brazil, just to appreciate the processes and what we can do from where we are. I think your presentation is here.
Sorry, now I have to allow you to unmute yourself. 1 second.
Thank you, Lily. So as Munjo said, I am the former C20 Brazil Secretariat Coordinator. The C20 Brazil last year was led by ABONG, which is the Brazilian NGOs Associations, and GESOS, which is an organization that works to promote gender equality. Next slide, please. So here, I will not read the slide, but just to share the working groups that we had last year. And as Rizka was explaining regarding the principles of the C20, one of them is continuity. So what happens is we do not randomly choose the working groups. So it's always connected with the previous year and also with the priorities from that current presidency. So for last year, this was the working groups that we came up with. And then the numbers of members are in each working group. And then as you can see, the working group on climate justice was the one with the most with the biggest amount of members, which shows also like the priorities for civil society, right? So yeah, next slide, please. So here also our numbers. So in Brazil, we had over 1,000 organizations and social movements from 91 different countries who engaged in the process, which it was almost more than 2,500 people engaged. So it was a very historical and remarkable C20. Next slide, please. And here is just to show as well. So in Brazil, we had the challenge, and this is already like one of the lessons learned regarding the language. So one thing that early in the process, a lot of people would send us email questioning the fact that the process was all in English. And for Brazil is a challenge because it's a country that mostly speaks Portuguese. And one thing that you see is that in every host country, the majority of the organization that end up engaging in the C20 is always like the organizations from the host countries, right? So for us, what we noticed was that it wasn't possible just to have translation in the main meetings, which would be the inception meeting, midterm meeting, and then the summit in the end. But we had to provide translation for the working group, for each working group's meeting, to make sure that the process was inclusive in a way that the people who would not speak English would be able to join and contribute with their reflections and on their debate on building the policy recommendations. So this is just to share like the amount of translation service that we had to offer, and also the amount of meetings that the working groups held in total for almost 3 months in order to build the policy pack, which is the final product and the main important product of the C20. Next slide. So here, lessons learned and challenges. I will be very brief, and then as Munjo said, when the floor is open, then I can dive deeper in this. But I think like one thing that we understood, and this is also happening in the C20 in South Africa, is that people do not know what's the C20, what's the G20 into the countries hosting the process. So we had to hold like a lot of meetings to explain to organizations what was the situation, in which stage we were at, and how to engage in all of that. So we did that a lot, especially earlier in the process. The Brazilian government publicity was very important as well. So last year, Brazil only like was breathing G20, so everywhere, like on the news, everywhere you would hear about the G20. So I think it helped as well for people to engage even more, and that's why we had like such high numbers as well. And then for C20, we know like how civil society is usually like excluded, like there is these like stereotypes on civil society. So for us, it was also a challenge to make ourselves relevant in the media, for example. So we would constantly feed the media to explain to them what we were doing, that we were serious as well, and to make sure that the G20 is not just about economies, right? It's also about human rights. You can't discuss like economy without human rights, without people's issue. So this is something that we had to do throughout the year, always like feeding the media with information, always inviting them for our meetings, sharing with them the meetings agenda, making sure that we also had high-level politicians in the panels in our meetings, which is part of the advocacy work. So throughout the year, for the three main events, we had ministers. In the summit, we had the Brazilian First Lady, Janja. We had an event, the high-level political forum at the UN, which we had Zain also participated, because as the process is happening, in the current country, we also need to focus on the next country that will host the process as well, right? So it's also part of the advocacy, to engage with the next country. So we made sure to engage with DIRCO early in the process as well. We also had to reach out to journalists, like breaking down the Situani on specific topics that would be interesting to them, just to show how serious civil society was about the debate under the G20. Another huge challenge that we had was when the government announced the G20 social. And I think this is a very, very important information, because the way that the government announces it, it seems like that is the first official space for the civil society to engage, right? But at the time, the C21 was the official engagement group through which the civil society would engage, and also it's how the G20 leaders hear us. So it's the C20, we are the responsible one to share the policy recommendations, to participate in the meetings, to provoke the governments, that we need to be on the table, and that our recommendations should be delivered to decision makers. So when the G20 social showed up, for us, people would come up to us asking about the G20 social. So we had to explain not only the difference between the C20 and the G20 social, but we also had to explain why the C20 existed. So why are you still relevant if the government is making this is creating this huge space for civil society engagement, right? So this was something that we have like to battle a lot throughout the year, not only the C20, but also the other engagement groups as well. And then you can go to the next slide, please. And then in dialogue with that, it was very, very important for the C20 to engage with the other engagement groups. So we did a lot of advocacy together. We would support each other. We would participate on each other's panel as well. We wrote a joint statement to Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa. So telling him like how it would be important to continue to engage the engagement groups, to give our voices in important meetings such as the finance track, especially, which is the one that we have like the hardest time to access, and so on. Another challenge that has to do with the issue that we are facing now in regards to the C20 leadership dispute, which is we didn't have an active troika last year, which is, as Rizka said, the troika is composed by organizations from the previous country, the current country, and then the next country, right? So we didn't have a troika that was very active. So I think that now we see, how it became even more challenging, the process of the handover to South Africa, right? So I do think this is something, it's a lesson learned to focus when it comes to the handover to the US as well. Next slide. I'm trying to run as fast as I can. I will not read everything, but I think this is just to highlight some of the outcomes that we had throughout the year. So each was like, these are very important achievements. So for example, the meeting with President Lula was something that we were fighting for. And again, not only the C20, but all the engagement groups together. The majority of us, of course, not all of the 13 engagement groups. I will correct myself there. But the majority of the engagement groups were, fighting to have a meeting with President Lula so he could receive, and hear our recommendations, what we had, and that was important to happen right before the Leaders Summit. So we finally got that meeting to happen in November 11th, like 5 days before the Leaders Summit. We also had DIRCO on our panel on the C20 Summit. We had the First Lady there as well, the Brazilian First Lady. For the first time in the G20's history, the 13 engagement groups got to participate at a meeting with the deputies of the financial track composed by ministry and central banks. As I mentioned before, this is like the most difficult rooms to get in as members of the engagement groups. And we got to do it last year. I hope that South Africa continues and gives the opportunity, for the engagement groups to be in those rooms as well. Next, please. And then finally, here are also some of the recommendations that the C20 wrote in our policy pack were actually mentioned also by the leaders in their final declaration. We also made, I'm sorry, there is Ms. Tipo here, public statement against the war on Gaza and Ukraine. The C20 also made a public statement about that. And also the policy pack, like all the working groups, so when writing their policy briefs, it was very, very important to have cross-cutting teams to make sure that there is no human rights violation or exclusion of any groups. We found that these were the key cross-cutting teams that should appear and be respected in all of the policy briefs. So we made sure that once the working groups would deliver to us the policy briefs, we would have experts revising all the policy briefs, making sure that it was in accordance with these specifically teams. Thank you. And I'm sorry for rushing.
No, thank you, Sarah. I think that was very important in terms of helping us see the pitfalls that we should be able to avoid as we move forward. And let me quickly move to Prof. Muller. I'll put you on hold a bit, but you are next after this. But before you, I want to bring in very quickly for 3-4 minutes or so, Matthew Parks, who is with Labour 20, because I think he has to dash somewhere. Comrade Matthew, can you give us a brief, where is the Labour movement with regard to the G20 processes, the engagement with African labor movements and the broader Global South labor movements? Are we making progress?
Hi, good morning, colleagues. No, thanks for having us. So I think it's a moving target. So we're participating in the G20 or the Labour 20 stream of the G20, as COSATU, as well as the other organized labor federations at NEDLAC. So that's FEDUSA, NACTU, and SAFTU. We've had good engagements with our own colleagues domestically as organized labor in the country. We've also had engagement with other peers from other G20 member states, whether it's the US trade unions or unions in Asia, Russia, across the world, all the G20 states. And I think we've got a fair amount of synergy with the overall themes of the G20 this year, for equality, sustainability, development, and so forth. We think those match broadly with organized labor's vantage points. We've had quite a few good engagements with the Employment Working Group stream as well, which was hosted by our own Minister of Employment and Labor, but includes her counterparts through other G20 member states. So I think broadly it's been good. We still have, quite a few discussions in June, July, leading up and so forth. So I think it's largely going positively. I think the one thing which we need to do a bit more work as organized labor is just given how fluid the current geopolitical discussions are going. Sorry, apologies for that. So we're concerned about the current instability in the world around geopolitical issues, around some of the conflicts, etc., whether it's in Palestine or Ukraine, because those have an impact upon workers. When you see conflicts in Ukraine, it pushes up the cost of wheat, etc. When you see conflicts in the Middle East, it pushes up the international oil price, which has an impact upon developing world economies and jobs, etc. Similarly, we're concerned about the rise of instability with regards to World Trade Organizations. With regards to World Trade Relations. So, the imposing of tariff duties by the US administration does have a real impact upon South African jobs, upon jobs across the G20 and other countries as well. So we've kind of raised a need for us to see how to strengthen multilateralism including institutions like the G20, how to strengthen the WTO, where trade issues should be resolved, etc., and how to just kind of cool the temperature kind of around the broad geopolitical framework. I think a lot of the G20 discussions, including ours, have gone well on that front. I think there's been a large kind of meeting of minds, but it does mean also finding ways to address, colleagues in the US's concerns, to also make sure they are fully on board the G20 processes. But, in terms of our own counterparts in the US, in terms of the US trade union movement, the AFL-CIO, they are fully participating in these processes. They'll be coming down for our L20 activities in June, July, and so forth. But I think we do want to see that come the end of the year, I think as other colleagues said earlier, that there is a decent handover of the G20 from South Africa to the US, the next host. And I think also the colleague said earlier that that we continue to kind of retain the positive kind of foundations laid for this past 4 years with the G20 being hosted by the Global South. And that when the US hosts it next year, that those kind of foundations are enriched, are nourished, etc. So I think it's a bit wobbly, but I think even listening within all of this kind of noise, there is synergy. I think even on the world trade difficulties, the tariffs, etc., etc. A lot of those issues are kind of informed by challenges the working class in the US experiences, which is not really fundamentally different from challenges we have had in South Africa. The issues of deindustrialization, the issues of globalization, what are the consequences, the issues of migration and so forth. So I think we do need to collectively seek smart solutions, which are win-win. I don't think you need to have win-lose or zero-sum solutions. But I think we just need to find space for parties to engage each other. And I think that's a useful space that organized labor can try to fulfill, even with our colleagues in business too. Because we are concerned about jobs, about economic development, about inequality, about instability, etc. So I guess in summation, Chair, I think it's a work in progress. I think there is good discussions. I think there's more that needs to be done. And I think we really need to kind of focus on how collectively as labor, we can help contribute to common sense solutions. But yeah, thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Com. I think that it's very important to be able to hear the progress you are making, but also I think there would be a few colleagues from Labour in the meeting who might be looking at how do they engage with you and all that. And so we'll hopefully be able to link some of the colleagues with you from Labour in the meeting, especially the informal Labour, because I see a lot of them. I want to thank you for allowing me to chair this session. I want to hand over to my colleague, Loaz Somia, who will take the second part, but also the part that that would have a discussion. But before I hand over to him, I want to bring in Prof. Nania Mula, who is working with the Women 20. And we know that it's critical that women's voices are on the table in these discussions. Prof, where are we? What's been happening? Any challenges? But also, how do we get more women, particularly in the African context, to begin to engage with what you are doing officially, but to ensure that at the end, in the communiques themselves, the women's voices are not left out?
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to know if you can see my presentation.
Yes, I can see it. I can see it.
Okay, fantastic. So a lot is happening with Women 20, and it's wonderful to be with you all today and to be able to share some of this. And I know I'm standing between us and an important discussion. So let me just jump in. So Women 20 has certain priorities, and I'm hoping that the slides are moving.
They're
Can
moving,
you see
Prof.
the second slide? W20 at a glance.
You may proceed,
Yes,
Prof.
thank
We
you.
can see it.
Thank you so much. So Women 20 at a glance, really the most important thing, I suppose, is that we are the main voice within the G20 landscape or ecosystem dealing with women's economic empowerment and gender equality, as much as sometimes we are being reminded that gender equality is not necessarily a concept that is embraced at the moment with the pushback against women. So we are an official engagement group. We work within the context of the South African presidency's themes, solidarity, equality, and sustainability. We also work towards contributing towards the Leaders' Declaration and moving us closer to attaining Sustainable Development Goal 5. So we are a group of women, volunteers across the W20 countries from different sectors. So there's business, academia and research, civil society. And our common focus is gender equality and feeding that in and mainstreaming it into the G20 processes, along with other engagement groups. And we also work very closely together with G20 Empower Alliance, as well as the Women's Economic Empowerment Working Group in the ministerial track. Our main value is Ubuntu. It is an African value that emphasizes who we want to be as South Africans. Yes.
Prof, your slides
Yes.
went back to the start, unless you're moving to other slides.
Okay. I'm on the green slide, W20 at a glance.
We are at the beginning again.
Oh, goodness. Okay. I thought there might be a bit of a problem with the slides. Let me just continue talking, and maybe I can unshare. I have sent
Take over. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Let me just, thanks. Is it there? Thanks a lot, Lily. So that's the slide that I was talking to. And I've mentioned the importance of the work that we do within the G20, as well as towards the United Nations Development Goals. We're celebrating 10 years this year, so that is something that is very special, and we're working towards some celebrations that I'll share with you. Our value is Ubuntu. It's an African value. It relates to the concept of solidarity, of us being people in relation with others, our identity as South Africans, and our identity within the global context, within this wonderful context of multilateralism. And we are about being women in solidarity towards sustainable socioeconomic development. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I've mentioned, we align with the G20 2025 presidency values and themes. We make actionable recommendations towards the Leaders' Declaration. So we work under the Sherpa in Durko. We're honoring 10 years of Women 20, and we want to promote people-centric advocacy as well as planet-centric advocacy through effective outreach and knowledge sharing. Of course, in order to do this, we require resources, and sometimes we are limited in terms of our outreach efforts. However, I'd like to say that we have been in contact with GCIS in the presidency. They are doing some really phenomenal outreach work and public participation in the various provinces, and we will be involved with those efforts. Of course, we also aim to strengthen the voices of Africa and the Global South throughout our presidency this year. Next slide, please. We have 7 thematic areas. 7 is a lot, but what we've done is we've done a lot of consultations around the issues that women are facing in South Africa, in the global South, and the G20, and in actual fact, the world today. We've taken from our previous presidencies over the past 10 years, as well as tried to align with other ministerial groups and engagement groups. So our 7 themes are financial inclusion and entrepreneurship, the care economy, climate justice and the environment, gender-based violence and femicide, health equity for women and girls, including reproductive health, women, land and agriculture, which is something that hasn't been focused on in a big way in previous W20s, but we know that it is very important for us as South Africans. And then we're also looking at education, STEM, and bridging the digital divide. And our cross-cutting areas are persons with disabilities, as well as the African agenda. Next slide. I'm sure that you all know about the processes that we go through within the various tracks, including the engagement groups. We involve our task teams in working together on recommendations based on the 7 themes that I've shared with you. These recommendations are then gathered together in the form of a draft communique. Then we have to reach consensus on the W20 communique across the W20 countries. And once that's done, we release the communique at our summit in October, which I will touch on briefly. There's the outreach track, which, as I say, we cannot do this on our own. We have to do it together. We have to work together to ensure that we have an effective outreach within South Africa, but also in Africa. And we have partnerships with various NGOs in Africa to try to attain as an effective inclusion of African voices as possible. We are also under the Sherpa, as I've mentioned, in the Departments of International Relations and Cooperation. And then we have events. We have events such as this. We contribute to other conversations, many of them and many interesting ones. And of course, we have our own events. We also have a couple of community outreach projects that we are planning. Next slide, please. So this is just a general idea of who we are. I'm Professor Nanya Bola-Muller. I'm from the Human Sciences Research Council, Science Council in South Africa, under the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation. And so I am from the, let's say, the academic or research sector and head of delegation. My co-chair is Sibulele Pozwayo. Sibulele is in the CSO sector. So we've tried to find a balance in terms of that. I also have an African advisor from Kenya who is assisting to put me into contact with numerous businesswomen and organizations throughout Africa. We are working on governance of Women 20 to ensure continuity. Here, this is extremely important, continuity and legacy projects, because we are handing over to the United States next year, or at the end of this year, 2026, in all probability. So we have to make sure that we have embedded what we do sufficiently to be taken forward. And so the Troika, Brazil, South Africa, and the United States are working very close together. We are celebrating 10 years, as mentioned, and we have a working group dealing with that. And we have a number of knowledge partners and fewer funding partners. But we are also still looking for sponsorship to ensure that when our international guests come to South Africa, they can have a wonderful experience in this country with all its uniqueness. Next slide. This is just a snapshot of our delegates, our South African team. As I've mentioned, these are all volunteers, wonderful women within the science community, business, and civil society. and working very hard in our task teams to develop recommendations to take forward into a communique. Next slide. This is just what has been happening and what will continue to happen. We launched on the 26th of February at the National Research Foundation offices in Pretoria. It was a hybrid event and extremely successful. We were involved in the commission on the status of women in New York. We weren't there for the full time period because New York is very expensive. But we had a number of events there which we co-hosted with W20 Italy, with the World Bank, with the Global Alliance on Care, and a number of other partners that we have. On the 21st to the 22nd of May, we will be having an inception meeting in Cape Town, and our summit, the pinnacle of what we are doing, will be on the 12th to the 14th of October in Johannesburg. We will also be participating in Social 20 Summit South Africa, and we are very much looking forward to that because we know that there are far more voices that will be part of the conversation during that Social 20 Summit. Next slide, please. This is just an illustration of our launch that was held on the 26th. We had the Deputy Minister of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities addressing us. We were very honored for that. We also had the CEO of the HSRC, Professor Sarah Motswetsa, as well as a special guest, Her Excellency, our previous President and Deputy President, as well as the executive of UN Women, Kumzile Mlambo Nguka. And that is an artist that gave us a depiction of what happened at the launch, and this will continue during other meetings so that at the end of the year we have a wonderful depiction of what we have been doing as W20. Next slide, please. This is just the upcoming meeting in October, sorry, in May. We are having it in Cape Town at the Lagoon Beach Hotel. We're currently in the midst of organizing this meeting, and we are very much looking forward to participation as much as possible because it is a hybrid event. So we have a website, and I'll post the website address for you in the chat as soon as I've finished. But we really do hope that you will join us. We have a huge responsibility on our shoulders as Women 20 to ensure that the voices of women are heard and understood. Next slide, please. I think, yes, this is just the summit that I've mentioned now, and we will be releasing our communique at the summit. We'll be handing it over to our Sherpa, and then we will be lobbying for our recommendations to be included in the Leaders' Declaration. Next slide, please. The next slide, I think, is just what we believe in as Women 20. And that is former President Nelson Mandela's spirit of Ubuntu, that should be not only something that is South African or African, but something that is about humanity and human beings and our common search for a better world. I'd like to thank you very much for your attention, and I'm hoping to have a good discussion after this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your presentation. I would like to bring on the Youth 20 and then followed by the Foundations 20. So Mr. Ephraim Mangera will be representing the Youth 20. Over to you, Mr. Mangera.
Greetings, everyone. It's still a good morning. I hope I'm audible. I promise to provide leadership and be very short and succinct, and leave some time for if colleagues in the session would like to have questions. Thankfully, the chair is Chair Raymond of the co-chair is in the session of the Y20. But nonetheless, let me begin by saying, for us, Y20 and why it matters is that it's not just a platform, but a global movement of young change makers who we wish continue to contribute to reshaping the table itself of the decision making. With South Africa being at the helm and it being, as many other speakers spoke today, on the African soil for the first time, we recognize that youth from the global South must no longer remain on the sidelines of global governance, but take their rightful place and claim that space as a call to action for this youthful generation, and particularly from an African context of the most youthful continent on the planet, to take shape and to guide the decisions for our futures. We speak today recognizing that this is a continent that has the resources, the culture, the human potential for reshaping the structural underdevelopment that's happened, the challenges around global marginalization. And with youth representing over 60% of our population, unemployment should not be as high as it is, exceeding over 50% in many areas. We as the Y20 have recognized that alongside these many challenges spoken about already, and I won't mention or re-mention them, are powerful opportunities. And therefore, one, how does Africa lead the green energy revolution and not just follow it? We are poised currently to leapfrog outdated technologies and build a digitally inclusive economy from the ground up to make access available everywhere. And with the right investment and partnerships, make Africa a hub for youth entrepreneurship, creativity, and innovation. Our theme as the Y20 South Africa is youth building bridges, uniting for solidarity, championing equality, and driving sustainability. This reflects not only the G20 priorities, but the urgent aspirations of youth across Africa in particular and the world over. We have thus far already engaged global partners and regional bodies, as well as local partners and civil society actors towards achieving these objectives. Framing the African youth voice in the G20, as African youth, we carry the dual burden and opportunity of being disproportionately affected by global crisis while being at the forefront of innovation, organizing, and resistance. From climate justice to economic equity, we are no longer asking for inclusion. We are asserting our role as co-creators of these solutions. In this context, the Y20 South Africa has processed and taken deliberate steps to center the African experience. And our thematic areas includes, number one, on climate change, a call for just energy transition that doesn't replicate colonial extractivism and recognizes that Africa is the least responsible for this crisis, yet bears such a high human and environmental cost. Number two, on inclusive economic growth, we demand systems that value youth labor and support entrepreneurship growth, not just in Silicon Valley, but in the Soweto, Nairobi, and Lusakas of the world. Pathways to prosperity should mean a realization that the current economic models need reimagination, equity, if it were to deliver real and tangible change to our respective economies. The third being on digital futures, we speak not only of AI, but of access, and the digital divide has to end. While we seek that end, we must heavily invest in innovation and education and to be prepared for the future of work. Number four, on multilateral reform, we insist that young people, especially from the global South, be included not just as a tokenistic side event participant, but as actual decision makers at the table, and also explore meaningful youth engagement and how can we possibly reform multilateral systems for a just future. Number five, on social development, we link gender equality, mental health, and food security to the integrity of our democracies and various countries. No one should be left behind, but as it stands, millions are. So what urgently needs to be done next? Those are the five key tracks that we'll be focused on, and we've already undergone the processes of receiving papers and interest. We are also building something durable The Y20 South Africa is advocating for the creation of a Y20 Sherpas Council, the structure we hope to ensure gets built and developed with other Sherpas so that we can drive accountability for youth recommendations beyond the summit. We want a system that doesn't just hear youth year on year, but implements what we say and tracks that we are not moving simply from symbolic inclusion, but actual systemic follow through. A call to action, this is not work we can do alone. And therefore it's spaces like this and many others that we work with different tracks and of course with policymakers. We need stronger mechanisms so that we can collaborate better, but we've already reached out and engaged other tracks. The Y20 leadership have already taken and launched the process and recently hosted an official side event at the ECOSOC Youth Forum in New York as part of its campaign of engaging and working with youth across the world. In closing, let me say, Chair, that if this presidency is to be remembered as a turning point, it will be because we move beyond the symbolic inclusion of young people, of women, and of everyone to real systemic transformation of global infrastructure that is actually keeping us out of development. And as the Youth 20 grounded in the realities of African youth, we are working towards that reality and hopefully work with you collaboratively to achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the young people of the G20 for their presentation. I'd now like to move on to the Foundations 20 with Ms. Raiza Cole. Over to you, Raiza. Ms. Cole?
Hi, sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. I wasn't allowed.
No problem. Yeah.
I
You may
was.
proceed.
Yes, so I am from an organization called Democracy Works Foundation. I'm here with my colleague today, Lerato Maloka. But today I have my F20 hat on, Foundations 20. I don't know if we have our presentation. Lily, can you share it, please?
Sorry, give me 1 second.
So yeah, maybe just to say about Foundations 20, we are a group of 80 plus foundations and philanthropies across the globe. Some of the largest philanthropic organizations are part of F20, and our mandate is really to create a platform for collaboration and peer learning around climate advocacy. From kind of the perspective of philanthropies and foundations. And our kind of key, oh, is it presenting?
Yes, it's on our screen. Proceed.
Can you go to the next slide then, please? Yeah, our so like I said, we are a non-formal engagement group of the G20, or what they call an independent engagement group of the G20. So most of our kind of advocacy work is centered around the G20 processes, but we also tie this into kind of advocacy work around the COPs, New York Climate Week, and other kind of key moments in the climate decision-making calendar. Our aim is to provide solution for today's kind of most pressing challenges, climate change and just transitions, and we do so in a very kind of intersectional way. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah, so we have 3 kind of core roles. The first is as an enabler or kind of a bridge cross-pollinator between non-state and state actors. Being kind of foundations and philanthropies, we have a certain level of independence from kind of government decision making, and so really try to serve as kind of this cross-pollinator or bridge between civil society spaces that we kind of sponsor or support, and governments that we work with to kind of achieve development goals. And then the second role is that we act as kind of a sounding board for our members, so for philanthropies and foundations around kind of climate change issues. And then the third kind of role is we put a lot of kind of focus into peer learning and serving as kind of a learning platform for research and investigation into kind of impact, what is working, what isn't within the climate space. Can I go to the next slide? Sorry, I realized that I sent a PDF to you instead of a PowerPoint. My apologies for that. So today I really wanted to focus on our recommendations. We published them in February, and because F20, like the other kind of engagement groups, is a very global focused, or at least G20 focused organization, and therefore needs to kind of include recommendations or advocacy points that are applicable to all G20 countries. We have launched our recommendations in February with a strong input of obviously our steering committee and our members. But we are in a process now in partnership with Democracy Works Foundation to really run a campaign around what these recommendations mean within an African context and the African Union's kind of recent membership to the G20. So we have 7 recommendations. I'll try to run through them as quick as possible. Can you go to the next slide, please? The first recommendation is around taking action to foster economic prosperity through a just and inclusive shift to renewable energy. And this obviously ties into South Africa's priorities as well as Agenda 2026. And here we focus on encouraging renewable energy expansion, supporting responsible mining and critical minerals, and advancing the bioeconomy initiative that was launched in Brazil. Can we, under the Brazilian G20, can you go to the next slide, please? Oh, maybe just to say also, we are really focusing on kind of having or promoting and strengthening the link to the Sustainable Development Goals that the South African government has committed to as well now. So each of our recommendations has direct link to the Sustainable Development Goals. So under the first recommendation, still we have an actual action plan, some of the policy needs. We are focusing on social ownership, investigating what some of the kind of social ownership models that are emerging across Indonesia, Brazil, India, and South Africa, and exploring how that can inform a just energy transition. We are also focusing on integrated planning as Democracy Works Foundation. Our climate governance strategy specifically views the climate moment as an opportunity for strengthening broader democratic processes and as a transformation moment, to transform kind of institutions and participatory processes. So really having it as a very intersectional kind of integrated approach. And then we're also exploring kind of what are the emerging legal protections and how philanthropies can begin to support those. Our key priorities under the first recommendation is an affordable and democratic energy transitions, a focus on safety nets, respect for land rights, and especially the protection of kind of indigenous and vulnerable communities. Some of the key actions that philanthropies in our network will be supporting is obviously to minimize ecological harm and protect biodiversity during the just energy transition, and to uphold human and indigenous rights, and then to promote circular economy approaches. And then, like I said before, we are really focusing on strengthening the bioeconomy initiative that was developed under the Brazilian presidency.
1 minute left.
Oh, I have 7 to go through. Can you move on, please? Yeah, so the second recommendation focuses on implementing measures to catalyze sustainable industrial decarbonization. And here we're focusing on implementing a carbon pricing and incentives. We're supporting R&D funding, and then harmonizing emissions measurement, defining what green products actually are. And this will be important from an African perspective to really think about what an African definition of that could be, and then to support the modernization of energy grids. I can move on. We are also supporting the South African government's kind of drive to reform financial systems that drive development goals. So reforming international financial institutions and expanding liquidity and debt relief. Can move on. Oh, sorry. Next one.
Yeah.
Double
Can
slide.
we conclude?
Okay.
Can we conclude?
No, I still have 3 more to go.
Okay, quickly.
Yes, so the fourth one is strategically align and mobilize flexible financial resources. And here we are promoting the phasing out of fossil fuels, ensuring accessible and flexible financing, and implementing a G20 sustainable finance roadmap. We can move on. And then we are driving solutions for climate smart agriculture to promote food security and biodiversity. And here we're focusing on funding grassroots farming and aligning food systems with climate goals. Can move on. Yes, and then we are advancing intersectional environmentalism, like I mentioned earlier, amplifying marginalized voices, combating environmental racism, and fostering partnerships. And then our last recommendation, can you move on, is to strengthen country platforms, institutionalizing country platforms, shifting MDBs and NDBs to multi-year programs, boosting financial coordination, leveraging philanthropy as a patient capital or de-risking investment, and then prioritizing long-term resilience. Move on, please. You can skip through this to the last slide. So I just want to say that we are running a continent-wide campaign to adapt the F20 recommendations to an African context. And we would like to call everyone that has participated in this call to share it widely, the recommendations widely with your networks. There are several ways that you can participate, but in the meantime, you can contact either me or my colleague Lerato. I'll put our details in the chat to provide your comment on the F20 recommendations on how they are relevant to an African context. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raisa, for your contributions to this discussion. I'd like to now quickly move on to the African Union ECOSOC Secretariat with Mr. William Karu to explain what is the African Union as the new entrance within the G20 umbrella doing to further harness and foster African voices, and what are the main challenges and progress made in the African Union's engagement in this G20 process. Over to you, Mr. Karu.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to share. I think I have a presentation. I will appreciate if it can be shared. But to start with, I would like to indicate that civil society organizations play a crucial role in the G20 by ensuring that diverse perspectives are represented and that the global governance actually reflect the needs and aspiration of all key stakeholders. I will want to establish a background by asking, how do we make the G20, the C20 more inclusive and ensure that critical voices are represented, especially in terms of their comparative advantage. And this is where the African Union Economic, Social, and Cultural Council comes in as an organ established by the African Union, which has a mandate through the Constitutive Act of the AU based on Article 5 in terms of popular participation, but fundamentally in terms of providing input into policies and programs, and then also to serve as a bridge between the African Union and policymaker. So ECOSOC was then established against that backdrop of unstructured relationship that has existed between member states and civil society in the development process. So when you read through the statute of ECOSOC, it's basically to promote dialogue between all segments of the African people on issues concerning the continent and its future. And therefore, I see ECOSOC as an organ which has a critical role within the African Union ecosystem, and more especially the fact that the presiding officer of ECOSOC can take the floor, even at the highest level, which is the assembly level, to bring in civil society perspective. So how do we leverage on institutions like this in pushing the agenda, especially from the C20 point of view? So in terms of key objectives from ECOSOC, it contributes to the integration and inclusive development of the continent, and then also provide platform through which the African Union will then partner and engage with civil society organizations in the continent. And then just to limit it for this presentation, it also facilitates effective interface between member states of the African Union and their people through partnership and engagement with the African civil society organization. We move to the next slide, please. Why should African civil society engage with the G20? And I think concerns have been raised from various presentations. So for us, we see the need to ensure that African perspectives, especially civil society, the citizenry perspective, are included in global policy making. So one is to look at the aspect of advocacy, to advocate for debt relief and financial justice, which has been a conversation in the global arena. Climate financing and just energy transaction is also very critical. And inclusive digital economy and trade reform, but more fundamentally to hold government and the G20 accountable, especially in terms of perspectives of citizens that are coming in as an input into some of this conversation. Next slide, please. So advocacy and lobbying in terms of how can civil society organization engage with the G20. So we are saying because of the technical competencies within civil society organization and the nature of the work that you do, and we do, submitting policy brief to G20 working group become very critical in terms of providing input on critical issues that affect African citizens. Engaging with the African Union through the AU representatives, like I said, the African Union ECOSOC as a platform, which is a given platform in terms of legitimacy and credibility to engage and bring civil society perspective within the African Union system. And I think these are some of the ways we can leverage. Parallel forums and shadow reporting. So we look at the C20 official engagement group, the Africa Progress panel report. These are very critical on how CSO can engage with the G20, but more importantly, information through public campaigns and media engagement. So raising the awareness on G20 decisions that affect African citizens, that affect the continent as a whole. I think these are very important, and I'm pretty sure most of the organizations that have been part of this engagement are playing this role. But then how do we ensure that a consolidated voice in terms of bringing our perspective and our challenges together on how we can then provide input through the relevant channel that we have, I think is very important for us to look into. Next slide, please. In terms of key achievement of African CSO in the G20, you all will agree with me, you saw the influence of the G20 debt service suspension initiative during the COVID-19. Is a critical advocacy role that has been played by civil society organization, pushing for climate finance commitment. So the loss and damage fund that has been established and the advocacy around all these issues. The advocating for the Africa Continental Free Trade Area so that Africa will have a single market and the whole aspect of integration become a reality. So strengthening the AU permanent membership in the G20. These are key areas in terms of key achievement from civil society organization advocacy over the years. So some of the successes that we are seeing today is as a result of the relentless effort of civil society organization. And we see, for example, the Tax Justice Network, the role they play in fighting illicit financial flow. They have pushed the G20 to address tax evasion and also profit shifting. So I think these are critical aspects that we need to also be able to highlight in terms of achievement on what has been done by African civil society organization and how we can leverage on some of this in terms of ensuring that we keep the momentum. Next slide, please. Challenges facing Africa, before we go to the recommendation, please. The slide before this. Yes, the challenges facing African civil society organization. So there are limitations in terms of access. So I think that has been clearly communicated. G20 remains a dominant, is being dominant by state actors. How do we ensure that we don't just stay in the periphery to discuss, but how do we bring the input of civil society to be incorporated into main agenda? So funding constraint, less resources compared to our Western civil society organization that are engaging is also very important. And the aspect of fragmentation, there are diverse voices, sometimes lack coordination. So the use of official channels. So how do we ensure the C20 work with institutions like the African Union ECOSOC? How do we channel some of the output or outcome document through the African Union ECOSOC that can easily find its way to the African Union policymakers? I think these are channels that we need to be able to leverage so that civil society can be able to have a united civil society voice on the G20. The united civil society voices is very critical. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So some just few key recommendations. We need to be able to formalize the civil society G20 engagement channel. And we are proposing to say, as one of the entities that has leverage that we can also be able to utilize is ECOSOC. It is your organ. We are just a channel of which every African civil society can be able to leverage in order to bring out their input and perspective and table it to the policymakers of the African Union. The second aspect is advocacy around increased funding for African policy research. We want to be able to undertake critical research, empirical-based evidence to inform some of the issues that we are talking about so that they are rooted from empirical-based evidence in terms of informing policy formulation, strengthening alliance with global CSOs, and even strengthening alliance to avoid the fragmentation from the African point of view. So in as much as we have the diverse voices, which is good, but how do we find a common ground to consolidate the work that we are doing so that we're able to have the same message and the same narrative being put forward? Leverage digital advocacy, social media, webinars, and the like. And so these are some of the things which we just want to share briefly with the limited time which we have. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Karu, for your short and succinct presentation on what the African Union ECOSOC Secretariat is doing, especially harnessing African voices during this G20 period. I'd like to give the floor to our respondent, Mr. Professor Faiz Ismail, the Director of the Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance. And then following Professor Ismail, I will open the floor for comments and questions to the panelists following Professor Ismail. Over to you, Prof. What are your thoughts of the current G20 engagement process, harnessing African voices, and some of the critical aspects that there should be consensus on amongst the various engagement groups leading up towards South Africa's G20? Over to you, Prof.
Thank you. Thank you so much to you, Loazi, and to colleagues, and thanks for the invitation to participate. I won't be long because I know we've run over time. So it's been a great pleasure really to listen to all the presentations, and particularly from the civil society groups that are represented here. And there's such a rich and context that you are providing to the G20 debate that will be taking place here in South Africa that has already started. I'm just going to make a few points. The first is that, so I myself, I am on the T20 forum. I'm on the advisory council, and so I'm participating, and I've also contributed a policy brief. But I am here also as a representative of the Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance. We have a program in the school to support the G20 presidency in South Africa. And in this context, we have published an op-ed series, and I'm going to ask Sanusha, who's here online, to maybe just put in the links. So we have submitted 4 op-eds that were already published a week ago in the Daily Maverick. And the first one that I put forward was really to assert the basic principles and values that the South African and the African presidency should be advancing. And those principles really emerge from the ideals and the values that were enunciated by Nelson Mandela. You will all recall as we became a new democracy, he published a fantastic article in a journal, Foreign Policy, in which he asserted that South Africa's foreign policy should be based on human rights. And he also stressed the importance of multilateralism. And very importantly for the continent, he said that South Africa should engage with its neighbors, not in a paternalistic way, but in a spirit of solidarity. So those are some of the basic principles that I argue in my op-ed that should be front and center of the G20 presidency. So I'm very excited that South Africa has chosen the principles of equity, solidarity, and sustainability. And as someone said, it should be sustainable development. And of course, what should be added, and I think what also comes through in South Africa's presidency, is the very, very important emphasis on multilateralism. There are 2 other op-eds that speak to issues related to the African continent and the need to advance the African development agenda. So Professor Rob Davies, who is an honorary professor in the school, makes the case for the AFCFTA to drive a process of not only market opening and regional trade integration, but also one of developmental regionalism. And that is to put front and center the need for a developmental approach which prioritizes industrialization on the African continent. And yeah, he's made a number of proposals for how African countries working together under the umbrella of the African Continental Free Trade Area should be using the policy space that has opened up for very robust industrial policies. And given that we are now in a climate crisis, we need to transition and ensure that the way in which we industrialize doesn't harm the environment, but is sustainable. So how to advance green, sustainable, ecologically friendly industrialization. And he makes the case for that. And my colleague, Dr. Nonqedu Vutula, who's in the Nelson Mandela School, makes the case for agriculture to be prioritized because of the importance of food security. And she also advances ideas about how to build regional value chains across the African continent in the area of agriculture. And then finally in that series, Professor Carlos Lopez, who has worked in the United Nations for many years, including in the UN ECA, the Economic Commission for Africa, really looks at the current context that we are faced with in this presidency. It is a unique context. It is quite dramatic. It is possibly a historical moment because what we're witnessing here, he argues, is a shift, a significant shift in the trend that we've seen in the last few decades. So in the last few decades, we have seen a growing importance of social issues to be put on the agenda of the United Nations, and incremental advances made across a wide range of issues. Many of those you've spoken to today in the various platforms of the G20's engagement groups, dealing with issues from health and food security to issues of gender. These were all addressed in the United Nations, and many advances were made. Although they were incremental, they were very significant. What we have witnessed in the last few years, and particularly in this last, in this moment, is a decline of those values and social issues, including, very poignantly, the decline in ODA. So commitments to support development and developing countries. We've seen a massive decline and a shift backwards in the last few years. But most importantly, there is a shift, he argues, in the way in which decisions are made, and the principle of multilateralism is being eroded significantly. And he says that we're seeing the end of the principle of consensus or multilateralism. So this is a very important shift. We have, I've been reading the literature and watching the news and commentators across the world in the last few weeks. And there is a consensus that's emerging amongst these commentators that what we're witnessing today is a dramatic shift that has held for about 80 years, since the Second World War and the creation of the United Nations, and the major institutions of multilateralism, like the Bretton Woods system, the bank and the IMF, and the GATT and the World Trade Organization. These organizations created some stability in the world, or in the new world order, and they created a more peaceful environment for economic and social development to take place, and they were relatively stable. Of course, there were criticisms and challenges about them, because this was a period when developing countries were still coming into their own, the process of independence and new democracies were still taking place. But and there was a contestation of some of these principles that were advanced by the liberal international order. Nevertheless, this system persisted, and what we are witnessing today is a contestation of this, a significant contestation by the major powers in the world. And the major threat we are witnessing, and we're already seeing this in the last few weeks as South Africa takes up its presidency, is the rise of the right across the world, particularly in the North, in Europe and the United States. And this is a massive challenge to all the gains that were made over the last few decades by all of us as humanity. And so this G20 presidency is taking place in this context of contestation. Now, I'm putting 3 priority tasks for us as the G20 in as we take up the leadership in South Africa, together with all our friends across the continent. The first is that we've got to reassert the importance of global cooperation to safeguard and advance the interests of the poorest countries, the LDCs and the African countries. These interests should be advanced. And so many of you have put forward what those interests are across a wide range of issues related to development. And the second is we've got to assert the values and principles that we have fought for over the years, some of which have been enshrined in the United Nations and have been won in the UN, and consensus has been built around that. And that's why I started with Nelson Mandela, who very clearly asserted what those principles are. And we've got to try and work together with alliances, not only across Africa, but across the world, including in the North, with the NGOs, civil society organizations, and governments in the North who stand by those principles and values, including multilateralism. So that would be the second task. And the third is to consolidate. South Africa is taking up its leadership of the G20 as part of almost a consolidation of the major developing countries, Indonesia, India, Brazil, and now South Africa. And when we look at the reports of this discourse and the advances that were made in various working groups, there were tremendous gains that were made, because Indonesia, emphasized the need to advance the SDGs. India focused on development across all working groups. Brazil emphasized both hunger and poverty, but also climate change, very important. And a lot of work was done about how the world could advance those concerns and interests. So we need to consolidate that. There's some research going on, and I think together with our colleagues from Indonesia, India, and Brazil, we should consolidate that work, because there's a real danger that the G20 may not be able to hold for much longer as the US takes over the presidency next year. So that would be the third task that I suggest we should be engaging in as this G20. But thank you so much for asking me to make a few comments. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Prof, for honoring our invite. Now we move on to the important part, which is the discussion. I'll open up for one round of questions. So please use the heart function at the bottom of your screens, where you can raise your hands. My colleagues will assist me in noting names and hands concerning this discussion. And as you know, part and parcel of this endeavor is ensuring that a lot of African voices are actually harnessed throughout this G20 process, and to have people understand where they can fit in, and how they can engage with the various working groups, and how do we now foster a greater African participation. I'll be waiting for hands. I'll only leave behind for one round, but whilst we're waiting for hands, Ambassador Mandisi Mpatlwa, you've had experience with these processes, and South Africa enters this hosting process under very, very difficult international environment. What are your thoughts on how can we better harness African voices throughout the entire continent, taking into special consideration your recent posting in Rwanda? I'd like to pass on to you, Ambassador Mpatlwa. And also some of your thoughts concerning the various engagement groups and their inputs today. Over to you, Ambassador.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Lwazi, and good day. It's already after 12, I think. Good day to everyone. I'll try to be as brief as possible. I'll partly make some observations and comments, but there'll also be areas where I invite and challenge some of the speakers to respond to some pointed issues that I think are of critical importance. And I just want to start by saying that the strength of the participation of the South in the G20 is a particularly unique feature of this particular platform. And I wish I could expand on that, in terms of, the origins of the G20, but because of time, I won't do so. I also want to say that the membership of the AU in the G20 comes after a very long fight and against a strong push to actually expand the participation of the North and European, countries in the G20. So these are some of the fights and challenges that we've had to contend with. And in this context of AU membership, it's actually going to be quite critical, that we are, quite engaged with the issue of enhancing the AU's capacity to engage meaningfully across all the G20 work streams. And we've got to look at, the role that South Africa can play in that regard, but also how, we mainstream the engagement in the AU forums themselves on G20 matters. And this is an issue on which I'd like, Masocha Mnguni to perhaps give us a better sense of the work that is being done. And maybe William also, who has just spoken, he can also give us a sense of the work that is being done to make sure that with us having achieved this membership of the AU in the G20, what is the progress? What is the sense in terms of really ensuring that the G20 can be a meaningful participant? And I think this is particularly important in the context of, if we look, for example, at the three, key areas that South Africa has thematized, but also the three high-level task forces, they cover the entire spectrum of the issues that are of the greatest importance to Africa at the moment. And therefore, this really becomes an opportunity, but also a very important issue for us to address. That is that of ensuring that the AU can use this platform to enhance its own interests. I think I also want to raise the importance of the expansion of G20 engagement platforms. I mean, we've seen a proliferation of, T20, B20, Youth 20, all these platforms. And I think this is important in the sense of promoting the profile of the G20, enhancing engagement in the G20, but also the relevance of the G20. And this is important also in a larger context. As the G20 was gaining traction, it was beginning to emerge as a platform that provided opportunities to smooth the resolution of critical and difficult issues in multilateral forums. So this expansion of participation, I think it's something that we've also got to look at in that particular context. And this is also important in relation to the really challenging geopolitical environment that we are faced with, which poses real risks, I think, for the future of the G20. And I'd like really to, again, perhaps ask Masocha, Sanusha, who I saw is participating in this, and maybe Faisal, to just look at this issue of the risks, this current moment that we are in. Is it just a flash in the pan, or are we really facing risks, to the existence, relevance, and effectiveness of the G20? And maybe the last 2 points in the interest of time. I was quite pleased with Ashraf Patel's input in raising some of the issues on the involvement of academia and think tanks. And the one issue that I'd like to raise, because it's important for these institutions, academic institutions and think tanks, to contribute to the resolution of problems of humanity and the world more generally. And so I'd like him to give us a sense of, the work that is going on to share the burden and to maximize capacities in this particular regard across the various academic institutions and think tanks, because I think that's what we need, so that there isn't actually competition among these bodies, but cooperation and collaboration to make sure that you can bring those capacities that reside in those institutions into resolving the world and humanity's problems. The last point that I'll raise, again, I'll ask various speakers, Masocha, Riska, Sarah, perhaps Sanusha, and Matthew. Ashraf also raised the issue of solidarity. And I want to come at this from the point of view that it's important for us not to allow solidarity, the notion of solidarity, to die, because this is something that has been very important in the post-World War II era. Whether initially in the anti-Nazi effort, in the post-war Euro reconstruction process, the anti-colonial struggles, and post-independence development challenges and efforts. Solidarity has been a very important part of this. And so it's important that we also are alive to the risk, of the death of solidarity as part of what defines our world. So those are just the issues. I had more issues, but I'm being sensitive to the issue of time. Thank you so much, Lwazi.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for being so sensitive to this issue of time. And I realize that we're running over time, and some of the participants want to have some of the slides. We will present some of the slides at a later stage. I'd like to bring on Mamba Batamila Dlamini to come on for your remarks. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Lwazi. Let me thank all the presenters, as well as the respondent and Ambassador Mphatwa for their contributions. But also hasten to say, as the Pan-African Women's Organization, we have met with W20 leadership to discuss the role of women in the whole process, and they've also briefed us on the work that has been going on, and we have joined the processes. We will be signing an MOU together with them, because we also would like to see African women participating in the whole G20 process, and we also have to ensure that women are represented in all the chapters. As PAWO, we are an agency of the AU. My concern about the whole thing is about us igniting a fierce battle of ideas and spark a profound national discussion in South Africa and Africa at large, as we are hosting a G20. When we were preparing for Beijing, for the Beijing conference, we ensured that before we even left Africa and our countries, South Africa, our country, was aware of what was going to happen. So I think we must be strong in social mobilization at all levels. G20 must not be seen as a white elephant. To make an impact, it must be seen as a platform for everyone, and everyone must actively participate in shaping the whole discourse. And we have to ensure that people understand their power and the responsibility in this revolutionary moment. And I think Ambassador Mpatwa has touched on this very strongly. We can't just let this period pass just like that because of the geopolitical situation. We've been looking at the right-wing opportunism and populism growing throughout the world. And we need to use this opportunity to ensure that everyone breaks the silence and there is no complacency. And we need a grassroots and radical engagement and door-to-door conversations, community forums that are going to ensure that there is activism, and so that we bring back that social mobilization that was there in South Africa, so as to ensure that we all own collectively the processes of transformation. And workers, students, marginalized communities must contribute tirelessly and boldly. And we must be able to ensure that everyone sees the turn of the situation, and everyone sees that there is going to be real and tangible change. And we must demand that our voices are heard in every corridor of power, and challenge things that are going on, the issues of gender-based violence, because it has been growing, and we must use this opportunity to ensure that there is a united front against gender-based violence. This is our moment, and we must seize the power of ideas through action and through unwavering solidarity that also Ambassador Mpatwa has spoken about. Let's harness the energy of everyone, and we are available to try and ensure that communities are mobilized. People must not just see a G20 coming and going. They must feel being part of it, and they must feel the change that G20 must bring. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Madam President, for your contributions in this discussion. And I'm sure the Pan-African Women's Organization will take these African voices forward in this G20 process. Sis Molly Dlamini, then after Sis Molly, Sanusha Naidu. Molly, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Lwazi. Greetings to the leadership of our country here, government, CSOs, and everyone. I just have a few questions. I'll try to do that in a minute and a half. My first question goes to Mr. Mnguni. Mr. Mnguni, thank you so much for the elaborate presentation. You are always generous in terms of sharing whenever you speak. My question would be, would it be possible in the priority that deals with capital, or rather the debt, would it be possible as well to add the element of domestic resource mobilization, considering that we want to address this vicious cycle of debt? So as much as you would be looking at the issue of the cost of capital, lowering the cost of capital, can we also see the opposite of promoting domestic resource mobilization? And I want to quickly make an example about Ethiopia, how they built the Renaissance Dam, hydro dam for hydro energy. which could be which is a good response to the climate emergency that we're also talking about. And most of the groups here speak to climate emergency, environmental sustainability, and the project that one would also have in mind are projects like the Inga Dam of DRC, how that dam can electrify the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. So we really wish, Mr. Mnguni, that we can begin to be more concrete, in continuing with the things that we did before. And we know South Africa was instrumental in pushing for that Inga project. So we do wish, that those kind of solutions can come and with domestic resource mobilization in case where a cost of capital is a challenge. And secondly, with regards to the theme, Mr. Mnguni, I know you deal with content, but it would be, considering that the venue is Nasrec and considering that Nasrec is next to Soweto, we would like to see this theme in action, with the whole hosting, considering services, getting services from the people of Soweto, so we'd like to see that. And the last one for you, Mr. Mnguni, quickly, has to do with the hosting of side meetings. We would wish for DECO at some point to share more information about entities that wish to host side meetings and the calendar of those and the processes that has to do with that. And then my request for Professor Nanya, Professor Nanya, can you consider adding the priority of the women in conflict, when you deal with GBV, so that, the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 is integrated in the priority that you mentioned. And lastly, just to add on what Dr. Williams said about the illicit financial flows, we would also like to see an addition of the illicit mineral flows that is coupled with transfer pricing. We don't think it's a challenge that South Africa faces alone, but because we are endowed with minerals as a continent, we really wish that these two be combined. And to Brazil, thank you very much. We appreciate that they started the social summit, and we are glad that our country is continuing with that. And we really salute Brazil and President Lula, who's a former trade unionist, and makes us understand, that element of inclusivity. And we wish our government to also carry that spirit of inclusivity, as we continue. And just lastly, I know I will sound like a broken record to Mr. Mnguni, because I asked this recently, the religion, is it possible really to, even if it's not included, the R20, the possibility of having it or proposing it, we would appreciate it, considering the role that the interfaith, the religions have played in the space of economic justice, and how they continue with that kind of advocacy. Thank you very much, Lwazi.
Thank you, Sis Molly. Sanusha, and then Alice.
Thank you very much, Lwazi. And also let me just thank all of the presenters providing very important, insightful, and I think the engagement on the G20 is really this kind of information sharing, but also the activities and how this is going to be taken forward. I want to make two very quick points, and I think Faisal made these points in his respondent remarks around the G20, and in particular, I think the question in the context of where we are is, how does the G20 deal with the systemic issues that are unfolding at the global architecture, at the global level? Because I think the challenge is really this question in terms of the fact that all of the all of the streams, the work streams around the G20 comes back to the question about what are the conditions at the structural level and the systemic level of the international system that's going to be impacted on. So if indeed we take the point of departure that the challenge for the G20 is its versatility, its utility, and more importantly, its fit for purpose going forward, the value proposition, then the challenge is really thinking beyond just the G20 in 2025, moving into 2026, because I think the challenge for all of us is that the G20 comes out of crises, whether it's 1999, whether it's elevated in 2009, and right now we're in a very, I would say, a dire consequences of structural economic crisis that is dealing with the way in which institutions of the global governance arena and the strategic dimensions of that are being impacted. So it's not just about a tariff war, or it's not just about whether the presidency of the US and the Troika. It's really much more profound and much more deeper, based on this idea that we are in an existential kind of that dilemma. And that for me is a bigger question about where does South Africa's hosting of the G20, whether it is to galvanize the global South, but also bearing in mind that the global South is not a homogeneous bloc either. So there are different dimensions. And what does this mean for the G20 going forward? How do you actually domesticate those dynamics in Africa around building the kind of institutional governance mechanisms and levers around the ACFTA, but also lead it back to where we're going to? Because for want of a better way to describe it, I think we are basically entering a very dystopian global order. And that dystopian global order means that everybody wants to survive. And then the nation state is in that state of survival. And the social compact and the social dynamics of that is how it's being characterized in terms of what is happening domestically in countries, how it's impacting on the international institutional architecture, and it's having profound impacts on all of the work streams. So for me, I think we've got to keep reminding ourselves that the G20 is not just about hosting it or trying to get some kind of big value-added proposition in terms of chairing it, but what is the lasting impression that's going to deal with the systemic dilemmas of an international system? Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sanusha. Alice, and then we move on to our speakers. Alice? Seems like Alice is not there. I would like to start off with...
Can you hear
Oh
me?
yeah, Alice. Oh yeah, I
I'm
can hear you now.
sorry, I had muted myself. My apologies.
All right, over
Thank
to
you,
you.
Lozi. And thank you also to the speakers of this public dialogue, and also to the participants. I'd just like to mention that it's so sad to see the crisis and the challenge that we are finding ourselves in, and more specifically, the consequences that we will have to carry in terms of this geopolitical dilemma that we face as a country. And including the policies that might come about, and I think they might not be in our favor as a country. But in reality, we need to face the fact that these issues that we face as a country have been birth pains for a very long time, since the democratization of South Africa. Poverty has been there and now has increased to the most astronomical or unimaginable proportions. And it looks as though it's going to continue to increase. We can have these conversations, but if our very government is not working and delivering on its promise, instead of seeking self-interest, this president, Cyril Ramaphosa, has a very, very capitalistic drive in terms of how he's leading. And there's nothing wrong with being capitalistic, but it should also benefit the country. I find that we as South Africans for a pretty long time have just normalized all of these abnormalities that are happening, and we also find that we have huge unemployment levels where we have a national development plan that should have been looking at the goals and outcomes, but we never see that happening. Most of the political elite, while they still are benefiting at large and are financially benefiting and for self-enrichment, while our government is unable to create opportunities for businesses to thrive, because government has no business in creating businesses. It needs to create a favorable climate and create opportunities so that businesses can grow, and then we can have jobs for our youth and for the betterment of our people. We have not seen this happen. But I also think that if we had to liberalize trade and start looking at collaborating and working with our neighboring countries and seeking better trade relations there, we would not be in this situation. In fact, this situation has been long coming. So we really need to look at how our whole, politics of South Africa as a whole has failed us. And now we are sitting in a situation where we are desperately seeking solutions. And there's nothing wrong with that, but we talk endlessly about a way forward that never happens.
Alice? Can we conclude? We need to move on to the speakers.
So what I want to say is I have appreciated the conversations that have come about, and more specifically, the one that came from Faisal Ismail made a lot of sense to me. We should seek independence, our own independence at this point. If we cannot do this with this crisis that we are facing, then this opportunity will never come to fruition, because it's either we are going to make this work or we are going to fail dismally. So I hope that we can really say that these conversations will come to be heard, and these voices, because for a pretty long time, South Africa has been holding these dialogues and conversations that go nowhere. So thank you very much, Lwazi.
Thank you so much, Alice. Thank you so much, Alice. Mr. Mgula, I think the crux of that question was, what are the people going to get from this G20? What are the benefits of the G20 coming to South Africa? So to put you in the spotlight, I would like to hand over to you, Mr. Mguni, to answer some of the questions, since they were centered around Durko and the G20 project itself, and your parting shots to this meeting, and how the Africa itself stays a chance of directing geopolitics utilizing South Africa's G20 presidency. Over to you, Mr. Mguni.
Thank you, Lwazi, and thanks also to the participants that have raised the very important questions and also comments related to our G20 presidency. Also to acknowledge our political elders, the political leadership present here, Umam Batabile Dlamini, and of course, Ambassador Mpatla, and we also thank them for their very incisive with the comment you just made in terms of what's in it for South Africans. Over and above the benefits of hosting such a presidency of the magnitude of the G20. I did mention in my earlier intervention that the G20 is a strategic site to lobby for a progressive policy issues that directly impact the lives, especially of the people on the ground, in particular those from the global south and the African continent in particular. And of course, a link to that is the consolidation of the developmental agenda that started with the presidency of Indonesia right through to Brazil, and then of course us on issues related to debt, employment, in particular of a woman and the youth, the issue of the cost of capital, global health, and so on. And of course, in the situation we find ourselves in, quite correctly, it has been characterized as a volatile geopolitical climate where we are seeing a pushback by some prominent members within the G20 on quite important global commitments that, of course, come with major consequences for people in the global south and the continent. I'm specifically referring to the pushback on Agenda 2030 and all the commitments we have made as the international community, bearing in mind that we are 5 years away from 2030. And of course, it is widely now accepted that at the rate we are going, we are only likely to achieve just partial of the goals we have set ourselves, unless certain finance commitments are met. There is pushback on the climate action agenda. Umam Dlamini mentioned the question of agenda. There is a pushback on that as well. I can mention other issues such as, of course, the emergence of unilateralism, undermining of the rules-based international law, and of course the reform agenda in the UN itself. Which is why, of course, if you look at the outcomes of the first foreign ministers meeting of the G20, South Africa, through our leadership, we were able to get an outcome where the G20 reaffirmed their commitment to all these important processes where we are facing pushback. including on matters linked to diversity, equity, and inclusion, because even there we are seeing a major pushback. It cannot be that under South Africa's president, when South Africa is holding the pen on behalf of the continent and the global south, that we allow such a pushback to happen under our watch. Moving to the questions raised by Ambassador Mpatla relating to the work that is being done to make the G20 more inclusive. Of course, with the acceptance of the African Union as the latest member of the G20, we saw this as a significant step towards the continent's strategic objective to become an influential global player and partner, so that Agenda 2063 finds itself firmly in the agenda of the G20, which is why if you look at the basket of priorities, not only the high-level ones, which I alluded to, but also in the technical working groups, there are 15 working groups in total. And in almost all these working groups, you will realize that Africa features very firmly in the priorities, including, of course, the task forces, be it on inclusive growth, the one on food security, and most importantly, the one on artificial intelligence and data governance for sustainable development. Because there we see the continent being still lagging behind in terms of the digital gap that exists between the North and South. And one of the deliverables, of course, will be to have an outcome that really contributes to the continent somehow being able to bridge that gap. Concerning the geopolitical risks and issues, and of course, as we move, we do our work grounded in analysis, because we understand the complexity of working in a grouping such as the G20, which is largely comprised of the countries from the north and the south. The good thing is that when we presented our priorities in December at the first Sherpa meeting in Johannesburg, we had overwhelming support from G20 membership. Of course, bar a few countries, which of course I have alluded that pushback to. And of course, as we move along, what will be key is to consolidate those fraternal alliances, be they from the emerging market economies group, which is largely comprised of the BRICS countries. And of course, we have the African Union being a member of the G20. And I must say that linked to our presidency is the participation of countries from the continent that we have also invited as a special guest of our presidency, including Egypt, Nigeria, Algeria, Ethiopia. But of course, we have also invited the regional economic communities to be part of the work that we are currently undertaking. And of course, as I said, there is also some support that we enjoy from the countries in the north on issues that are very important to them. I can mention issues related to climate, to the issue of gender, human rights, the issue of multilateralism, multilateralism, and so on. Because the instruction that we have received from our political leadership is to push for an ambitious declaration that moves the needle for the better on behalf of the global south, but most importantly, the African continent. Then going to the issues raised by Umam Batawile Dlamini on the question of gender, of course, we couldn't agree more. This is a matter that is firmly on the agenda. We are, of course, in addition to the work being done in W20, advancing this issue firmly in the Women Empowerment Working Group. Our chairship of the G20 coincides with the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and the related platform of action, which was discussed recently at the CSW. I did mention the issue of SDGs. So key in our work on this important issue is advancing SDG 5 on women empowerment and gender equality. Molly referred to WPS. This year is the 25th anniversary of Resolution 1325. So this work, of course, will be firmly on the agenda. The issue of GBV and femicide, tackling workplace inequalities, and also increasing women's participation in the labor force. There is an existing commitment in the G20, which was advanced under the Australian G20 presidency, referred to as the Brisbane goal. So this relates to having 25% improvement in women's participation in the labor force. We have, of course, moved for an extension of this goal from 2025 and align it to Agenda 2030. So the deadline for the achievement of this target will be 2030, so that we can be aligned to the Agenda 2030. And of course, there are issues related to closing the gender pay gap and addressing the care economy, amongst other issues. Moving then to the issues raised by Sismoli on the cost of capital review. We couldn't agree more that the issue of domestic resource mobilization is linked to the work being done in this commission or review. Most importantly, of course, is the issue not only of mobilizing resources domestically to fund developmental priorities, but there is the question of illicit financial flows, which is also one of our priorities, combating illicit financial flows, which is the work, of course, we are doing in the development working group. Also linked to what you are proposing, Molly, is the need for the international community to support the processes that are currently unfolding in New York, which will eventually lead us to the adoption of the international tax convention, so that we do have an international tax regime that I think can create a more favorable economic climate and give guidance on issues such as corporate tax evasion, and so on. Related to the issue of including the Soweto township stakeholders in the summit. Of course, we are working closely with the local authorities, the city of Johannesburg. They are our key partners, and those discussions, of course, on the table. And there are also other discussions related to the township economy that are taking place in other platforms within the structure of the G20 presidency. The issue of the interfaith organizations being a part of the discussions, I'm happy to report that we have been engaging the Interfaith 20 grouping. In actual fact, 3 weeks ago, we had colleagues from Brazil led by Mr. Gustavo, who was the coordinator of the first G20 social summit in Brazil, where we hosted them here at DIRCO to start basically the roadmap for the second G20 social summit, and the Interfaith 20 representative contributed in a very significant manner to those discussions, and we are happy that they've indicated that they will be participating in the second G20 social summit, something which, of course, I did talk about in my earlier intervention. And then lastly, regarding your questions on side events, as per the norm, the major international conferences are usually accompanied with meetings of the nature you are referring to. There are procedures that are followed in terms of planning for those meetings through our G20 protocol and logistics committee. Maybe what we can do in order to save time, we can send your organization guidelines offline in terms of how then you can go about in arranging for those side meetings you are referring to. So, Mr. Chair, I think I will stop there, and then, of course, respond if there are any other issues I may have missed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mguni, for gracing our dialogue for today. And I'd also like to thank the other engagement group leaders and also civil society actors. This dialogue itself is not just merely a talk shop about the G20. It is a means of us finding consensus on the roadmap going forward throughout this entire G20 process. South Africa's success during this G20 period is Africa's success. And therefore, we should also be cognizant on the evolving nature of geopolitics that underpin the threat to the entire multilateral system that we need to be very conscious of. And therefore, South Africa embracing this entire multilateral system and organization and meeting in particular brings about the Liberation Forebears wanted. One of global solidarity and one of a better world. And therefore, South Africa placing itself as leadership within the G20 and trying to push the envelope and move the agenda items forward creates a situation that we as the international community need to be very cognizant of, especially when there are threats to the entire multilateral system that our forebears fought for. And therefore, I'd like to bring on my colleague Marissa van Rysburg for the closing remarks of this dialogue. Over to you, Marissa.
Thank you, Lwati. What a rich dialogue, so many insights, so much to unpack, but time is not on our side. So mine is just to say thank you to everybody today. Thank you to our excellent speakers, everybody who logged on and engaged, with special thanks to Honorable Dlamini and Ambassador Mphalwa. Thank you to my colleagues at SALO and our development partners, without which our work wouldn't be possible. And I really just hope that today's dialogue takes us even one small step towards the achievement of a communique that centers Africa deeply and the Global South and is meaningfully shaped by the values of solidarity, equality, and sustainability. I think I speak for us all when I say that. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.